The poet Christian Wyman once said, "To be truly alive is to feel one's ultimate existence within one's daily existence." And that is what you may in fact discover, just as I have done, at Mount Auburn Cemetery. I first visited Mount Auburn Cemetery on Sunday, May 11th, 1997. Where has the time gone? I can still remember that first visit like it was yesterday. I had just moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and while unpacking boxes at my new apartment, my landlady suggested I take a break and go for a walk at nearby Mount Auburn Cemetery. I was intrigued. Having grown up across the street from Woodlawn Cemetery in Elmira, New York, where I learned how to drive a car and spent many afternoons walking, sitting, and taking photos near the grave of Mark Twain, I was a bit reassured to think that I'd be living near a cemetery once again. Walking through the Egyptian Revival Gateway at Mount Auburn was a life-changing moment for me. I had never seen such a beautiful place. 173 years earlier, before the cemetery was even founded, the topography of landscape was inspiring to an earlier century of visitors, as Ralph Waldo Emerson mentioned in his journal in 1824. In Cambridge, there is some wild land called Sweet Auburn, upwards of a mile from the colleges, and yet the students will go in bands over flat sandy road, and in summer evenings the woods are full of them. They are so happy they do not know what to do. The day I arrived at the cemetery, I also felt so happy that I did not know quite what to do, or more specifically, in which direction to walk. Here I was in the midst of an urban oasis, surrounded by the sounds, sights, and scents of spring. Hummingbirds, vireos, warblers, orioles, in nearly every other tree. Dogwood, cherry, crabapple, and blossom wherever you looked. Tulips, pansies, daffodils, everywhere in bloom. Rolling topography, ridges, lakes, a pond, and a vernal pool. Notable wildlife, turtles, owls, salamanders, coyotes, and butterflies. Noteworthy residents like Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Mary Baker Eddy, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Isabella Stewart Gardner, Edwin Booth, and Dorothea Dix, buried or memorialized here. Amazing monuments, statues, and structures: Bigelow Chapel, Story Chapel, the Sphinx, and Washington Tower. All of the aforementioned elements coming together to create, through some subtle alchemy, as Christopher Leahy describes it in Birds and Birding at Mount Auburn Cemetery, a slightly enchanted atmosphere that is more than the sum of its parts. I couldn't believe my luck. I'd be living just a stone's throw from this remarkable place. A place that seemed to be at once a lively place in a vibrant dance with time, and yet also a tranquil place, resting quietly outside of time. I'm Jennifer Johnston, the Media and Communications Director at Mount Auburn Cemetery, and you are at the border between two worlds. Time. Where does it go? Where did the more than 20 years go since my first visit to Mount Auburn Cemetery? If you are like me, you obsess over dates and time. After my father died in 2014, I spent many sleepless nights trying to remember every detail of my last visits with him. What I do remember is that in his last year, he spent a great deal of his time focused on his past. Memories of his mother, my grandmother, who died in 2005, and memories of his childhood. Thinking back on my own childhood, I remember spending so much of my time excitedly fast-forwarding to tomorrow, and then a bit reluctantly rewinding back to today. Fast-forwarding to the weekend to be spent roller skating to my favorite music, and then rewinding back to math class. Now, as I have lived half a century on this planet, I find I spend a great deal of energy trying to hit the pause button on my life, trying to slow things down. Outside the gates of Mount Auburn Cemetery, the world whizzes by with a furious pace. Every day, every minute, every hour seems to be accelerating, and everyone I meet is streaming on demand. We're all streaming all the time these days, and we are always in demand. How can we slow things down in order to contemplate our lives, our mortality, and the lives of loved ones who have gone before? In a seemingly contradictory sense, we need to stop the passing of time in order to contemplate the passing of time, or to imagine the future. How and where and when can we manage such an impulse? The desire to be present. Since its founding in 1831, Mount Auburn Cemetery has retained its original purpose of being a natural setting for the commemoration of the dead and for the comfort and inspiration of the living. Nearly 100,000 individuals are buried and commemorated at Mount Auburn Cemetery. Throughout the grounds are nearly 50,000 monuments commemorating the lives and legacies of those buried or memorialized here. Every monument tells an important story about the individual it celebrates, and collectively, the monuments and the landscape tell the story of over 185 years of changing ideas about life and death. And those of us who work here, we take our charge of being the temporary guardians of this eternal space very seriously. It is as if, as the great poet Rilke stated so eloquently, our task is to imprint this temporary, perishable time and place into ourselves so deeply, so passionately, that its essence can rise again, invisible inside of us. For we are like the bees of the invisible. We wildly collect the honey of the visible to store it in the great golden hive of the invisible. Mount Auburn is the specialist of places, a place where anyone, can glimpse, as the poet Christian Wyman wrote, our ultimate existence within our daily existence. A place where, Wyman goes on to say, we can seek a poetics of belief capacious enough to include a mystery that may ultimately defeat it. For existence may not be a puzzle to be solved, but a narrative to be inherited and undergone and transformed person by person. Mount Auburn is a place where we might just, as William Blake's work suggests, cleanse our doors of perception so that we might see things as they truly are, infinite. Time may be a great practical tool, but perhaps, as Bertrand Russell described, a truer image of the world might be obtained by picturing things as entering into the stream of time from an eternal world outside. For to see the world truly, we should try to overcome the differences of attitude towards past and future, and to survey the whole stream of time in one comprehensive vision. The yearning for another time, the slower rhythms of our childhood and dreams, can bring about the desire for a time out from the ever-quickening pace of life outside the Mount Auburn Cemetery gates. Inside the gates of Mount Auburn, everything is quiet, and history might be translated as a private or a collective mythology. Thoughts might be of the past or of the future, or as scholar Svetlana Boym, who was buried in lot 8103 Mound Avenue at Mount Auburn, as Svetlana discusses in her book, The Future of Nostalgia, time might even bend like space, refusing surrender to the irreversibility of chronology that plagues our human condition. And although we cannot and should not literally spatialize time, we can meditate upon the idea of a place like Mount Auburn Cemetery, a place which temporalizes our perception of space. Mount Auburn Cemetery is an urban oasis and a place where anyone might glimpse their eternal selves within their daily selves. Our founders designed it to be that way over 185 years ago, and it remains so to this day. A place of the past, a place of the now, a dream for the future. Not unlike poet T.S. Eliot has reflected in his 1935 poem, Burnt Norton. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time's future, and time future contained in time past. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. He goes on. Footfalls echo in the memory, down the passage which we did not take, towards the door we never opened, into the rose garden. Echoes inhabit the garden. Shall we follow them through the first gate? In my experience, Eliot's gate functions very much like the gateway I passed through into Mount Auburn Cemetery over 20 years ago. Eliot continues, shall we follow into our first world, the deception of the thrush? Time and the bell may bury the day, the black cloud may carry the sun away, but will the sunflower turn to us? Will the clematis stray down, bend to us? After the kingfisher's wing has answered light to light and is silent, the light is still at the still point of the turning world. T.S. Eliot wrote that in 1935. The poet Robert Creeley, who is buried in lot 1509 Tulip Path, said something like this as well, and in one line no less. Look at the light of this hour. The Honorable Judge Joseph Story, who is buried in lot 313 Narcissus Path at Mount Auburn, and who is one of the founders of Mount Auburn Cemetery, put it very eloquently in his September 1831 address at the consecration of Mount Auburn Cemetery. Around us such beauty, the forest height, the sheltered valley, the deep glen, the silent grove, here the lofty oak, the beech, all around us there breathes a solemn calm, broken only by the breeze as it murmurs through the tops of the forest, or by the notes of the warbler pouring forth his evening song. We stand, as it were, upon the border of two worlds, and as the mood of our minds may be, we may gather lessons of profound wisdom by contrasting the one with the other. Ever present is consciousness, irrepressible consciousness. Amidst all these lessons of human mortality, of the higher truth that we are beings not of time but of eternity, let us take comfort that in future ages Long after we have gathered to the generations of other days, thousands of kindling hearts may continue to excuse my little paraphrasing here, revere Mount Auburn Cemetery, where nearly 190 years after Judge Joseph Story's address, people of every belief are still in need of, and indeed enthralled by, Mount Auburn Cemetery, the still point of the turning world, at the border between two worlds, where we might all catch a glimpse of our time-bound everyday selves, walking, dreaming, seeming, being, if even for one moment, in alignment with our ultimate and eternal selves.